Nai Kootenaya, Kent Morris Upper, Barkindji Wimpicha. Hi everyone, my name's Kent Morris. I'm a Barkindji man. Barker means river, and we are people of the river. And that's the Darling River, or how we call it, the Darling Barker. I live in Bayside, Naarm, in Melbourne, on Yallikat Weelam country. And Yallikat Weelam also means people of the river. My art practice is inspired by the knowledge, philosophies, stories and histories of First Nations culture that are embedded in the landscape, but that we don't see regularly or often enough, or even understand they're there. I look towards native birds in the built environment and their interactions, and how the ongoing impacts of colonisation and that race for capital gain is creating negative impacts culturally, environmentally, and how we might address that by utilising philosophies, First Nations philosophies, that have at its fore community connectivity over individual gain, care for country and the environment above all else. I spent 5 years at art school studying and producing sculpture. My initial interest was in sculpture in the landscapes and sculpture in public spaces, and some guerrilla work around sculpture in public spaces, unexpectedly appearing where people might not imagine them to be. I then exhibited throughout Australia with three-dimensional sculptural works. In 1996 my father passed, and this created a whole lot of issues for me around my culture and identity and family and community, which saw me stop making art for 20 years. I entered the Melbourne Prize for Urban Sculpture, so I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to explore ideas I'd been working on, and particularly around concept designs for major public works. Often these are competitive commissioning processes, and I've been fortunate enough to be shortlisted for quite a number of them, and that process of the brief, the site visit, the concept design process, the budgeting and materials, it's a quite long and it's a fascinating process, but it's also very time and resource intensive. And whilst I've been fortunate to have a number of these sculptures come to fruition, I'm always wanting to see an outcome in some form for the concept designs that I work on in collaboration with urban art projects, with UAP. And so I think the Melbourne Prize for Urban Sculpture provided the opportunity to put forward a project that would investigate creating smaller works, not these very large public works, but smaller works from my concept designs to see how they might materialise and what I might learn through their construction, to see them in real time and space rather than three-dimensional renders, and how they might look in a site, to actually build them and explore and construct ways to understand, have a greater understanding of what these public works could do or could be, outside of them being wonderful concept designs on a computer, to see them in real time and space and to learn from that process around materiality and the forms and philosophies and ideas behind them. In terms of public sculpture in Australia today, I think we have a far greater diversity and visibility. I think there's always room for greater diversity and visibility within public spaces for sculptures, to create dialogues and to ask questions. So I'd like to think that there could be greater support and larger budgets for public sculpture, and that often for projects it's not seen as an obligation to include public art, that it's actually becomes inspiring and a creative process where people can understand the greater benefit of what public sculpture does in the community. I think we've seen an increase in stories and histories being shared through particularly First Nations public sculptures, and I think those dialogues are important. I think there should be a way to address some of the negative monuments that from bygone eras, and how we might address unravelling the true histories behind some of the figures that are publicly celebrated, and what that really looks like from a broader perspective. But I think it's reasonably healthy overall. But I think there's always the room for the incorporation and inclusion and expansion around the country as a whole, learning more about First Nations stories and histories, and having those conversations and dialogues in public spaces, and to have some of our beautiful creation stories in major public areas so that people become very familiar with them. These are the stories that are embedded in this place, in this country, in this landscape.